Okay, so this is 10-7, part 1, and we're going to be looking at probability. The first type of probability we'll look at is empirical probability. Now this is where we actually run an experiment and keep track of the data we get from this experiment. So for example, if I roll a die and I count how many times I get a 2 out of 10, let's say 10 rolls. So that would be an example of empirical probability, where we're observing the number of time an event occurs out of the total number of observed occurrences. So the other type of probability that we are going to be looking at, and this is probably what we will spend more time looking at, is theoretical probability. There's some terms we need to understand in theoretical probability. The first one is an experiment. So any occurrence for which the outcome is uncertain. For example, again, if I roll a die, the theoretical probability of rolling a 2. The sample space is the set of all possible outcomes for an experiment. So if I'm looking at the probability of rolling a 2, the sample space would be all of the possible outcomes, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then an event is a specific outcome that we're looking at observing. So the probability of the number of outcomes of event E out of the total number of outcomes in the sample space is theoretical probability. Let's go ahead and dive right into some examples. So this example is in our book, and I recommend going to this page here and actually reading the description of this problem. So I would pause the video here and read that problem. But basically what the question is talking about is mammogram screenings for women in the United States. So 100,000 U.S. women from ages 40 to 50 were screened with a mammogram screening, which checks for breast cancer. And this is the data that we're getting from that, from that test. So here we're seeing that these are the amount of women who have breast cancer. So there's a total of 800 women who do have breast cancer out of a total of 100,000. That means there's 99,200 women who don't have breast cancer. Now, in that total, there's 7,664 women who showed a positive mammogram screening, meaning it showed up that there was breast cancer. And then there were 92,336 that had a negative mammogram screening. So let's look at some of the different probabilities we can examine with this information. The first one says the probability that a woman has breast cancer. So we always want to write our probability statement. So woman with breast cancer. Okay, we can abbreviate things here. And we're looking at the total number of women. And then we want the women with breast cancer. And so the total number of women was 100,000. And the women with breast cancer was 800. So we can reduce that, and that would be 0.8%. And so only less than 1% of women in this total group here had breast cancer. Now, among the women without breast cancer, how many had a positive screening? So we are looking at the probability that a woman without breast cancer has a positive mammogram. Okay. So again, you can abbreviate things however you want, or you can write the whole statement out. So what we're looking at here is the women without breast cancer, all the women without breast cancer, and then how many of them had a positive screening. So there were a total of 99,200 women without breast cancer, but of that 99,000, there were 6,944 that had a positive screening. So we're just looking at the women who didn't have breast cancer, and of those total group of women, how many of them had a positive screening? And this ends up being about 7%. So what's interesting about this one is that these are women who don't have breast cancer, but their screening came back positive saying that they do. This is called a false positive. Um, a lot of times this is what happens when you have a mammogram and it says you have breast cancer, and then they do further research and you actually don't have breast cancer. So that's good news that even though it came back positive, you actually don't have breast cancer. Now the last one here, it says, among women with a positive mammogram, what's the probability of not having breast cancer? So this is the probability of a positive mammogram without breast cancer. So with the total women with positive mammogram, and then we want the ones with no breast cancer. So the total number of women with a positive mammogram was 7,664 and didn't have breast cancer. Let's see, no breast cancer, and that would be 6,944, and that's about 91%. So what this is telling us is that even if you have a positive mammogram, there's a good chance that you don't have breast cancer. Now the scariest statistic in this whole chart here is this one right here. This is saying you have a negative mammogram screening, meaning you don't have breast cancer, but you actually do. And that is really what you don't want to have happen. You don't want to say, oh, you're good, you're healthy, no breast cancer. But in reality, you actually have breast cancer, and it's just not being caught. So this is a really good real-life situation of seeing, probabilities and their usefulness. And in the next video, we will look at part 2 of probability.